Hi there, today on Typical Books we're going to be talking about a true crime book on John Wayne Gacy. So now this is a typical book in that I have always been fascinated by true crime, hence this series on some true crime books that I read here and there. And thank you to everyone that voted on the previous vote. As I mentioned before, I was really surprised that hearing about a book about John Wayne Gacy was more interesting than a book about the Black Dahlia. So I'm still reading some Black Dahlia books. I'm going to come up with a review on a couple of those, I think, in the future. But for now, it is John Wayne Gacy Defending a Monster by Sam Amarante. This is a 2011 book by Skyhorse Publishing, and I believe I picked it up from BookBub. I might have paid full price for the Kindle. I'm not really sure, but I have been a member of BookBub for their true crime and horror stuff, and I'm really enjoying that because I get some really cheap reads that way, and I'm pretty sure this was one of them. Now, Defending a Monster by Sam Amarante was his lawyer at the time. It was his first client, which was super fascinating, actually, and this has to be the #1 John Wayne Gacy book. Not that I have read a lot of those. This is one of those cases where even if you only, by osmosis know about a bit of true crime, you probably know the details, the large details of this particular crime because it was in the news everywhere at the time, and it continues to be just because he was so double creepy. Now, I'll definitely say this is a 5-star read right off. It highlights that spiral that this killer went down like no other. I've read a lot about the crimes themselves and his house and things like that, but nothing really highlights how it went down those days that he was under suspicion and arrested, like this particular book. It chronicles the investigation, his apprehension, all of the police and psychiatrists' take on it, and of course highlights Sam Amarante's point of view throughout this entire case. But it's unlike other things in that it does follow it to the bitter end, but it is a highlight of the court proceedings too for a certain point of it, but it never gets boring. It captures the investigation, his apprehension, of course his confession, his mindset, the psychiatrist's opinions, and a bit of what was found at his house. There is a little bit at the end talking about his execution. Now, true crime books seem to be written by and large by journalists or ex-law enforcement of one kind or another, sometimes psychiatrists, sometimes just straight up true crime authors, and rarely, except for that shining case of Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, which was written about the Manson family trials. Bugliosi, I believe, was the prosecuting attorney. So he certainly wasn't on Charlie's side, and that shines through in that book. But yeah, that's the only one that really comes to mind. I don't know if you have read other true crime books by lawyers that were directly involved in the cases. Definitely let me know. So with John Wayne Gacy Defending a Monster, we get a bird's eye view from the bench sitting beside the killer. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender who murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Gacy regularly performed at children's hospitals and charitable events as Pogo the Clown, a guise he is famous for now. His conviction for 33 murders was the most by one individual in United States history at the time. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980, then spent much of his time painting and corresponding by mail until execution on May 10, 1994. It is a 5-star read, so for the first star, it is an easy to read and well written. It's neither too long nor too short. I think it's 300 some pages, somewhere in there. And it's written in a breezy manner, which will make the drunken white people kind of giggle. And by breezy, I mean like more casual. I have this impression that Mr. Amarante is very good at translating law to the layman, and he probably talks to his clients in his office like he would talk to them at the cafe. It's just very down-to-earth language, and that makes it an easy read, especially when it comes to jargon. And when there is any of that, it's explained out, and I like that a lot. Now, making the Constitution clear to the layman or the Joe on the street may be his calling. That seems to be exactly what drives him as a human being, and I don't necessarily think that he was put on earth to explain John Wayne Gacy to us either. But he does a great job of explaining the drive of the madness behind an individual like this. And not necessarily in a compassionate lens either, from the get-go. Once you have really met these two characters, as it were, in this novel, true crime story, that you understand immediately that this lawyer does not have compassion for this man, he has an understanding of the madness that drove him, and that makes it a very unique book. The second star for this goes to relaying something to me that I didn't already know. Now, there are those that are very well read in this case that may not glean anything new really from this. It is neat in itself to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, but there was a lot of nuance in this crime or these crimes that I hadn't known previously and wouldn't have known without reading this book. So I really enjoyed that bird's eye view. With the nature of these crimes and the victims themselves, it's not a stretch to imagine that Gacy was gay or bisexual or closeted gay, and struggled with that to a certain extent. And that is where that identity and madness are very separate. And I think Amarante does a really good job of separating those ideas in this and presenting it to those that may not have been aware of how deeply Gacy hated himself for multiple reasons, but a lot because he could never come to terms with his identity. How he was treated as a young man, how that warped his psyche, and some of the roots of madness that lay there that drove him into what I guess is a dissociative personality and beyond, into utter madness. The one thing I wasn't really aware of when I went into this book is the state he was in when he drunkenly confessed. I knew he had pled guilty. I knew that he had confessed, and he confessed numerous times. He was a bit of a blabbermouth even after this too, but I didn't know that night. And he takes us into the room with himself, his fellow counsel, and Gacy himself, and it is harrowing. This was Mr. Amarante's first case as a criminal lawyer as well. He had just hung his shingle as a private practice law. That's crazy in and of itself. And that nugget alone makes this really worth the read. If you're only casually interested in true crime or this particular case, I really do recommend this book, and I'm only 2 stars into the 5. The third star here is definitely because it is such a compelling read. It's written in a casual manner, so it's very digestible, it's not too long, and with a story that you know how it ends, somehow this book hooks you and you keep wondering what is going to happen next. We know what happens next. We know how it ends very clearly, but the way that it's written, it reads like fiction. In this case is worse than fiction. It's stranger than fiction on so many levels, and it is just a depraved story. Now, hooking a reader is something that is hard in a true crime case, especially when there's multiple books on the exact same case, or the case has been in the news for so long that we know every twist and turn. But this book has a knack of leading you like cliffhanger-esque from chapter to chapter. So it's very digestible, a very fun read for its dark nature. When it comes to true crime books, I kind of leaned heavily on a book earlier for not having photographs, and it's not like 100% necessity, but that true crime girl in me wants photos. I want photos and handwriting samples and correspondence. I want to see all these visual treats that go along with heightening a story, or having you feel that you are privy to some sort of clandestine information. This book does have them in spades. It has a photo gallery section, but it does something even more interesting with that. It does present photos outside of a photo gallery to heighten the effect of the story, so to speak. And it does lead directly into the story. And the way that these correspondences between like judges and the lawyers or hospitals, psychiatrists or whatever, or Gacy himself, just only lead to the story. So it's never superfluous. There is in fact a photo that is repeated within the book, and that is used to really great effect because the author, the lawyer, is trying to really drive home a point here, and it is very heartbreaking. I've never really had a true crime book succeed the way that this did in driving home the humanity of it all. I think they all try. Now, those that have followed this case quite closely or have read correspondence or own correspondence from Gacy, he wrote copious amounts of long-winded, blathering correspondence, and he was always after money. He painted a lot. He sold his paintings. You know, you've probably seen a lot of this Pogo the Clown stuff or paintings he did for people or of people, and it's all really sideshow-esque. But the way that the correspondence is used in this is not like that. There's copious amounts of John Wayne Gacy stuff out there, but this keeps it down to a dull roar and only what is pertinent to the story. So you're not going to get a rehashing or a info dump of all of this spectacular Gacy memorabilia, in that they keep it to a necessity here. The biggest difference I noticed between what we know and see of Gacy memorabilia stuff out there and what's in this book is something that may have been overlooked, or maybe it's not available other places, I'm not sure. But there's a big difference between the long-winded attitude of John Wayne Gacy in his 14 years behind bars, corresponding with anyone that would listen, and the lists and sketches that he made for police while he was initially incarcerated. Very, very different tone. Very fascinating stuff, and it is what helps this book become far more serious. So 5 stars overall. You take all of those points, that it is just a well-written book, that it does offer some new information, or information you may have overlooked, or information that you may have not deep dove into, or information that can only be taken from one point of view, and the fact that it tells a story we already know. We know how it ends, but this story keeps us hooked chapter after chapter. It is a compelling read. I really enjoyed this, a page turner, if you will. It offers fresh insight from a lawyer's point of view, something that a lot of true crime books don't offer, and this altogether keeps you reading, and is a very enjoyable book. Very, very well written book. This was co-written, I believe, with Danny Broderick, and it's one of those books too that it's written so well. I wish that Mr. Amarante could write more true crime, but I mean, what would he write about? I don't know what his practice entails after this particular case. I'd like to think he took a lifelong break from murders, but if he were in a position to write another book, I would be first in line, because I think that he's got a very interesting mind, and the way that he puts this case to us with that casual sitting at a cafe or a bar, whatever you like, sort of idea, it really works well, even for the long form version of a novel. I'll have to catch some true crime documentaries that he speaks in, because I'd like to see him talk. Totally aside, while I was reading this, I was watching The Sopranos for the first time, and I kept picturing Tony Soprano as the voice of the book for Mr. Sam Amarante. And I mean, Tony in a good mood, right? Not evil, mean Tony, but happy, jovial Tony is sort of that picture I got. And once I see a photo, there is some similarities between that character and the real life man. So yeah, if that helps, if you're trying to picture the voice, that is what I pictured anyway. And it made it even more enjoyable. So yeah, John Wayne Gacy Defending a Monster by Sam Amarante. Really a fantastic book. And I really didn't treat it like true crime in a way, in that I felt like I already knew the story. This story is stranger than fiction. This story is heartbreaking. It reminds me so much of a great novel. And it didn't leave me with that darkish, sinking feeling where I needed to read something a little more light afterwards, too. It just fit right in there with general horror fiction. So if you're looking for something that moves along like that, and don't want a item by item case breakdown as far as true crime goes, but a real story about people, then I highly recommend this book. Coming up next on True Crime, I'm going to talk about Dr. Lee Mellor's book, Conspiracies Uncovered. Now, I've talked about Behind the Horror by Dr. Lee Mellor, and I've talked about other of Lee's books as well, but yeah, that'll be my true crime thing. It's maybe not crime, but it is a timely and compelling book, and I really enjoyed reading it. So that'll be the next true crime-ish thing that I do. But coming up, as far as reviews go for horror, I just finished reading a book. It was a buddy read with Regina at Regina's Haunted Library. So next week, sometime, we'll have videos each on this particular book. So that's coming up, and I'm looking forward to it very, very much. If there's anything that you think I ought to be reading, whether it be horror, very extreme horror, or true crime, definitely let me know. Or, of course, if you've read this book, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So thank you very, very much for watching, and make sure that you have an ooky, spooky day.